I don't know if appreciation, gratitude for a country, or patriotism, whatever you want to call it, where you live, opportunity can be truly be captured just on material means. Like, hey, you have more wealth than anyone else. I don't know how much we actually care about that, where I think it's more about your intimate community that matters. Like, do you have a loving family, whatever that looks like? Do you have good friends? Did you have a happy upbringing? Do you have a good marriage and family now? Whatever it is, I think that's actually more key. I have no idea that family at the fireworks, what their finances were. In Washington, D.C., maybe they were super well off, hardworking immigrants, assuming they're doing all right, but they could have been dirt poor. And I don't know if... I think the love in a family and a community is a more important variable in patriotism, love of country, gratefulness, than is just, I have access to wealth. I mean, probably Matt and Terry can attest to.
Well, I agree with that partially.
They know a lot of wealthy people.
But remember that wealth isn't just stuff. Wealth isn't just possessions. Like, people tend to think, well, wealth is the stuff you own. Wealth is the ability to care about other things because you're not worried about dying, you know? Wealth is the ability to care about the environment because you're not worried about starving to death. Wealth is the ability to spend more time with your family because you're not worried about, you know, your roof caving in next time it rains. So like, wealth is time in a lot of sense, and wealth is other things that are important because it's an opportunity cost, right? If you don't have that money, then you're constantly scrabbling to try to prevent all these bad things from happening to you. And if you have the wealth, then you can prevent those things from happening to you with the money instead of with the time. And you can use that time for more fulfilling things. So to that extent, I think that wealth is important. But I also agree that, like, there's definitely a spiritual and a familial and a relationship basis to patriotism and happiness in general as well. And you need that regardless of how much money you're making. But I think it's easier to capture some of that stuff if you don't have to worry about, you know, where your next meal is coming from.
Yeah, I think, like, if we're currently the best off we've ever been, which I accept and agree with, but we also are declining in patriotism. That means you would have to accept the argument that if you go back in time, you're going to find a more patriotic culture.
Correlation is not causation.
That's true, but I'm going to try to make a causation.
Right.
You would think if the two were correlated, patriotism would drop, and as wealth increased, patriotism would go up. Mm-hmm. But it's not the case here. Wealth's gone up, patriotism has gone down, so the two have separated.
Right.
Which begs the question, how our economic material, access to economics, you know, greater access to material means, does that equate to greater patriotism? It doesn't seem so.
Well, no, it doesn't seem so. But it also doesn't mean that greater access to material means necessarily causes less patriotism. It doesn't mean that those things are causally related. There does seem to be a correlation there.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that they're causally related. And I don't know whether they are or not. They might be. But I would suspect that there's other factors at play.
Yeah.
And, like, I think a lack of perspective.
But if there's no causation, would it undermine your argument that, hey, you should appreciate America because you have access to modern everything that no one else ever had in the history? Like,
no, you still should. You still should appreciate America.
You
because
should
of those
still
things.
appreciate it, but should it cause patriotism?
I think it's an issue of complacency. Like, if you don't know anything else, you know, like, people have had it so good for so long that they don't realize how good they have it. Whereas in earlier generations, people could see the progress happening. They could see the difference between them and their parents. They could see the difference between them and just a few years ago. And they're like, oh man, like, you know, we had the Great Depression, and then we came out of the Great Depression, and the Great Depression was really bad, and now we're better off, so we can be grateful for that and feel patriotic. Whereas now people don't know anything but prosperity. That's all they've ever known is prosperity. And so I think that's the problem.